Digimon has always been a franchise very near to my heart, though oddly enough, of the three major merchandise-driven shows of the late 90s to early 2000s era, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Digimon was the one I had the least exposure to as a kid. Most of my Digimon exposure consisted of repeated viewings of the Digimon movie and the playing of 2 of the 5 PlayStation games that were released in the US. But those 2 games are likely not the ones that come to mind when somebody mentions PlayStation Digimon games. Most would think of the 3 Digimon World games that were all some flavor of RPG, but the 2 games I had were Digimon Digital Card Battle and the subject of this video, Digimon Rumble Arena. Digimon Rumble Arena, known as Digimon Tamers Battle Evolution in Japan, is a PS1 fighting game released in late 2001 in Japan and in 2002 in other regions. Rumble Arena is a fighting game, which is why right now I would like to preface that I am by no means an expert in any fighting game. While I have been known to enjoy playing a myriad of fighting games, I make no claims of being good at any fighting game, and especially not Rumble Arena. This is just a layman's analysis of a 20-year-old PS1 fighting game. When you boot up Digimon Rumble Arena, an intro movie plays, as is common for video games to do. It features the protagonists of the first 3 Digimon anime series sending their partner Digimon out to fight each other. And when you get into the game, you discover that is effectively what this game is, and all it is. It is a fighting game featuring the Digimon from the first 3 Digimon anime. The mechanics are relatively simple. The goal is to reduce your opponent's life meter to 0 in a best 2 out of 3 format, which is a very standard fighting game format. What is not standard is that it has this format in a platform fighting game. If you don't know what a platform fighter is, it is a term that effectively means Super Smash Bros. Knockoff. While that is an unfair definition, you likely now know what I am talking about. So anyway, Rumble Arena brings a standard fighting game life bar to the platform fighter format, which is pretty unique, seeing how most platform fighters copy the Smash Bros. Percentage and knockback formula. And given its release date, it's likely this game was meant to piggyback off of the popularity of Smash Bros. As an alternative for those with just a PS1. So it's interesting they took the route of 1v1 with life bars instead of a closer copy of Smash Bros. Now, onto the controls. Movement is done with the D-pad, with a fast dash being done by double tapping forward. All regular attacks are done with the square button, and a neutral attack having a number of automatic follow-up attacks done by mashing square. The attack button will also do an uppercut style attack and a tripping sweep by pressing up or down respectively. The attack button also will perform grabs by pressing towards the opponent on the D-pad when you press it, and a dash attack if you press while dashing. Jumping is done by pressing the X button. You can jump twice with this button before needing to touch the ground again to regain your jump. Important to note is that this is not a ground jump and an aerial jump, but 2 jumps. If you walk off the edge of a platform or use an attack that takes you off the edge, you get 2 aerial jumps, which makes for an interesting mechanic where sometimes walking off the platform can lead to a better position than jumping off. Jump count also resets when you digivolve, which I'll talk about momentarily, so you can even walk off an edge, do 2 air jumps, digivolve, and then get 2 more air jumps. I don't know when such maneuvers might be necessary, but that is the kind of thing I like to mess around with in games. Aerial attacks can also be done while in the air, consisting of upwards, neutral, and downwards attacks, all of which are done with the D-pad and square button in combination. Triangle and circle are your character's special attacks. In general, triangle tends to be a more physical-based attack, and circle being longer ranged, but it varies for each character. It also varies as to whether the special attacks can be used while in the air, and whether their properties change while in the air. L1 is the guard button, which reduces damage from incoming attacks. R1 is used for digivolution and super attacks. As you deal and take damage, your digivolution meter raises. Once it is full, tapping it causes your Digimon to digivolve. From here on, I refer to the undigivolved forms as rookies, and the digivolved form as megas for ease of discussion, although those labels are inaccurate for Gatomon and Stingmon, which are both actually champion-level Digimon. When your Digimon is in Mega form, it is far more powerful in most aspects, although you are on a timer as indicated by your Digivolution gauge reducing while you are in this form. For most Digimon, the Mega form has a different playstyle compared to the Rookie form, so you may want to consider whether the changed special moves are worth the transformation at that particular moment. However, in most circumstances, there is very little to lose from digivolving immediately. While in Mega form, you gain access to your Super attack, which is performed by pressing the Digivolution button again. Using your Super immediately devolves you back to Rookie form, but in exchange you deal a large amount of damage. Like any self-respecting platform fighter, there are items. However, unlike any self-respecting platform fighter, you can't turn them off, so you'll just have to deal with them. Luckily, most of them aren't particularly game-breaking, so there's not a lot of bullshit from their inclusion. Most items appear as cards, which is a tie-in to both the then-current Digimon Tamers anime and the then-current version of the Digimon card game. Cards come in a few variants. First is the projectile cards. They are one-shot aimable projectiles that is one of the 3 elements in the game. Yes, there are elements, I'll talk about them in a little bit. These are decent items, but nothing too exciting. Next is the Digivolution cards. There's the minus, the plus, and what is apparently called the Grand Cross. Respectively, these decrease, increase, and maximize your Digivolution meter. The Grand Cross is the only item I would call broken in this game, since you can gain a lot out of an instant Digivolution. There's also the Signal, which instantly digivolves Rookie Digimon if your Digivolution gauge is at max, though that item usually doesn't matter much. Next is the Rings, which are 2 temporary confusion cards, one being worse than the other. The last type of cards are the stat cards. The blue arrow decreases your attack power, and the marble bust increases it. There are 2 other types of items that aren't cards: food and bombs. Food increases your health, and bombs explode when you touch them or after a certain amount of time. I'd like to thank Scobon's 2002 Game Facts Guide for this item info, because I legitimately didn't know what some of these items did. When you first get into any of the game modes, you'll see that you only begin with 9 of the 24 characters unlocked. All 9 of these characters are your standard rookie Digimon who play as previously mentioned. Personally, I'm a fan of their choices for what Digimon to include. Obviously they all had to be from the shows, since this is one of the few Digimon video games to be a show tie-in, so it's not like they were going to put any unpopular Digimon in. Agumon and Gabumon are no-brainer inclusions for any Digimon game. Patamon and Gatomon are up there with those two. Vmon and Wormmon are effectively the Digimon Adventure 02 versions of Agumon and Gabumon. And Guilmon, Renamon, and Terriermon are not only amazing Digimon, but required for this game because it's a Digimon Tamers tie-in game. If I have any complaints about the Digimon choices, it's that they didn't include all of the main characters from Adventure in 02, but it's a minor gripe. Now let's go on to the first unlockable character, though it won't actually be your first unlocked character. Impmon. Impmon is another rookie, and he makes sense as a choice since he was effectively Digimon Tamers' 4th main Digimon. And this was a Tamers tie-in, as I previously mentioned. While I'm no expert at this game, I will say that Renamon and Gatomon seem to be the best rookie Digimon, though Gatomon does seem to have some trouble fighting the final boss of single player, as do most of the Digimon, but I'm getting ahead of myself. That opinion is solely based on my terrible playing of the single player mode, and may easily have no bearing on reality in multiplayer. I tried to find a tier list online, but none of the ones I found really seemed to agree with each other, nor did they seem to be made by any decent player, and even fewer were about ranking the rookies. Now prepare for disappointment, because I'm about to reveal the entire bottom row, as well as the one next to Impmon on the top row. They are the mega forms of their respective Digimon. These mega forms are unselectable in the single player arcade mode, except for Beelzemon, and function exactly the same as if you had digivolved a rookie and were unable to de-digivolve. Your Digivolve meter instead becomes a super meter. You are only able to use your super when it is full, and your super spends the entire meter, but you don't de-digivolve afterwards. Your meter also isn't constantly spent like it is for the rookie's megaforms. This means that there are de facto 2 different formats to Digimon Rumble Arena multiplayer, Rookie and Mega. While there's nothing in the game that forces you to follow these formats, what will force you to follow these formats are the people you're playing with. Now for the top row, starting from the top right and going left, because I want to save the top left for last. First is Imperial Ultramon Paladin mode. In-game, this is a white palette swap of Imperial Ultramon, which is Vmon's mega form, though in most other media it's an upgraded form. If you're wondering why his partners are both Davis and Ken, it's because in the show Imperial Ultramon is evolved from DNA Digivolution, or Jogress if you're feeling snooty, of Stingmon and Vmon's champion form, X-Vmon. As a side note, that is likely why they made Stingmon into Wormmon's Mega, since they didn't want to use Imperial Ultramon twice. Also, to the Digimon fans watching, no casual fan of the show who bought this game knows what a Grand Kawagamon is, or what it has to do with Wormmon, so that's why it wasn't made as Mega here either. Back to Paladin mode. Pretty much just a palette swap. His moves are all the same as a regular one, but his super is different. It's a sword instead of a laser beam. It's likely more powerful, but because of its shorter range, I'd say it's worse. The next two are Impmon's Mega Beelzemon and Impmon, which I've already talked about. Moving on. Next is Omnimon. Pretty cool guy, a fusion of Metal Garurumon and War Greymon. He uses fire and ice attacks, fun to play as, cool to look at, and he's one of the most popular Digimon, and is a fusion of 2 of the most popular Digimon. Pretty great choice. Next is Black War Greymon. He's just a palette swap of War Greymon, really. He might have some different attributes like speed or strength, but as a casual player, I don't really care all that much. The thing about clone characters and palette swaps to keep in mind is that the developer's choice usually wasn't clone or original character. It was clone or no character, so I have no complaints about Black War Greymon. Also, who doesn't love an edgy version of a popular character? The last character is Reapermon. Reapermon is the boss of the single-player mode, and is easily the most powerful character in the game, since the playable version is identical to the boss version, but I'd like to talk about his design a bit. Reapermon was actually designed for this game, and may be the best thing about this game. He fights with fire and slashes from his side. I don't have a lot to say about his design that it doesn't say on its own, so just look at him. This is peak evil Digimon design, and I hate him so much because of the single-player mode, which I'll talk about in a bit. I was able to find a bit more about comparative power levels for Megas than for Rookies, so I assume Mega format's a bit more popular. Reapermon tends to be considered easily the best, and seems to be usually banned by anyone taking it remotely competitively. After that, Magnadramon also seems to be considered very good. I didn't personally like using Magnadramon, but that's probably more of a playstyle issue than a criticism of Magnadramon. Omnimon and Imperialdramon also struck me as really powerful, but once again, that's only my opinion, which is formed through playing the single-player mode, and playing it poorly. As mentioned earlier, this game has an element system. Each Digimon has an element attached to it that determines what element their special moves are and what element they take more, neutral, or less damage from. Fire is good against nature, nature is good against water, and water is good against fire. Here's a handy infographic that I've shamelessly stolen from the Digimon Rumble Arena community Twitter account, link in the description. Also, two Digimon uniquely have both fire and water special moves, Impmon and Omnimon. Elements are at least a little important, since you obviously can't ignore taking more damage from your opponent. I'm not really a fan of this mechanic. I dislike the sort of mechanic where certain characters are better against others, not due to any standard mechanical thing like range or power, but because they receive an arbitrary boost against certain characters. And I will point out that that is only in fighting games and other that sort of competitive style game, not like, for instance, RPGs like Pokemon. I don't know how big the boost from elemental advantage is, but I did notice that the characters with elemental advantages tended to beat me more often in single player than the ones with disadvantages. Though I don't know whether this was due to a rising difficulty curve or because of elements, since the single player puts Digimon with elemental advantages at the end and the ones with disadvantages at the beginning. There are two instances where I noticed elemental advantages playing a major part. When playing as Nature Digimon, I noticed that I took way more damage from the stage hazards on the fire stage, and way more damage from Reapermon's fire attacks, than when I played as any other Digimon. The other stages that have elemental hazards are way easier to avoid, while the fire stage has it be extremely easy to be knocked into the lava pits. As mentioned when I talked about items, the projectile cards give you a blast of whatever their assigned element is. While they are pretty good regardless, having very little startup time, dealing a decent amount of damage, having a good spread, and being aimable in different directions. It's even better when the one you pick up has an advantage against your opponent that you don't normally have. I've mentioned single-player mode a lot so far, since it was the primary mode I played through to prepare for this video. Single-player is a pretty standard arcade mode that features 7 battles, as well as a mini-game after the 3rd battle. All fights that aren't against bosses are against rookies. There's no set order to the fights other than Digimon elementally weak to you being put earlier, and Digimon strong against you being put later. The last fight is always against Reapermon on his completely flat, not quite infinite, boss stage. Before you've unlocked Black War Greymon, the second to last fight will be replaced with a fight with him, if you haven't lost a single round in your current run. Outside of Reapermon being a purposefully overpowered boss character, and Black War Greymon being a permanent mega while you're usually playing a rookie, there's nothing too exciting or annoying about single player. After beating single player, the credits will roll and you'll be asked to save your high score if you achieved one. I've got complaints about Reapermon, though. The best way to beat him mostly involves abusing his AI, or abusing certain Digimon's ability to outspeed him, running away while occasionally firing a projectile. This means that some Digimon that are otherwise good will have a lot of trouble fighting Reapermon. For instance, Gatomon, which I previously noted I thought was one of the better characters, gave me a lot of trouble with Reapermon. On the other hand, Patamon, which seemed like one of the weaker characters normally, was among the best at beating Reapermon. The minigames aren't much to talk about. There's one where you mash square called Digivolution Race, there's one where you fire balls at gyms, and there's basketball. Basketball was my favorite of the 3, but none of them were particularly great. After playing them in single player, you gain access to playing them outside of single player in both CPU and 2-player versions, though I don't know why you'd ever do versus CPU. The game has 3 difficulty settings for the CPU. I seem pretty evenly matched with the hard CPU, with normal and easy both seeming easy. Which is why most of my prep for this video was done on those lower two difficulties, as beating Reapermon is difficult on normal and nigh impossible for me on hard. Now that I've talked about single player, I'll now talk about how to unlock the unlockable characters. The entire bottom row and Beelzemon are unlocked by beating the single player mode with their respective rookie. Reapermon is obtained by beating the single player once. Beating the game with both Gabumon and Agumon will give you Omnimon. Beating the game with both Vmon and Wormmon will get you Imperial Dramon Paladin mode. Beating the game with the 3 Tamers Digimon, Guilmon, Renamon, and Terriermon, will get you Impmon. To get Black War Greymon, you have to beat single player without losing a single round, including against Black War Greymon and Reapermon. The unlock methods are nothing special, though Black War Greymon's is pretty hard to do unless you drop your difficulty down to easy, simply due to how hard Reapermon is. There are also 7 codes to unlock 7 of the characters, though using these codes won't unlock Impmon, so you'll still have to play single player with the appropriate Digimon to get him, even though all of their megas are obtainable with codes, so these codes really only save you Agumon and Vmon runs through single player. You have to play single player a minimum of 10 times to unlock everything, or 8 if you use the codes, which in the grand scheme of things isn't that bad, especially if you play on easy. I, however, didn't play exclusively on easy, which turned some of my fights into Reapermon death marathons. I assume most people playing this game nowadays will be doing it for one of 2 reasons: interest in the small competitive scene, or to play casually with friends. So I assume most people will prefer to unlock characters as fast as possible, rather than challenge themselves against computers. Like any platform fighter, this game features multiple stages with different layouts, and as far as I can tell, they don't have names in-game. So I will be using names from the same GameFAQs guide that I referenced earlier. Each stage features some variant of stage hazards, except for a single one. We'll start with that one, although it is the sole unlockable stage in the game, unlocked in the same way as Reapermon. It is Reapermon's stage, also known as the back dimension. It is a completely flat stage that is incredibly long from one end to the other. No items appear on this stage, unlike every other stage. And to be completely honest, I don't like this stage. Flat stages like this, with no drop-offs, completely ruin the point of this being a platform fighter, and instead turn it into a fairly boring traditional fighter. And I'm sure that certain characters have heavy advantages from this type of stage as well. And apparently some people agree with me, saying as how this is one of 2 banned stages from the competitive scene. With that, let's look at the other banned stage, the North Pole. This stage isn't too bad in terms of layout. Its hazard is icicles that can hurt you and deal water damage. But there is one fatal flaw that makes this my least favorite stage in the game, and makes it banned from the competitive scene. The fact is that it uses ice sliding physics. This makes it extremely annoying to move around, changes how knockback works, and easily makes it the stage where I died the most in single player, aside from Reapermon's stage. I absolutely despise this stage, and I question the sanity of the person who thought ice physics in a fighting game was a good idea. I don't have much to say about the rest of the stages. Most of them are pretty decent layouts, although they all have hazards that make them kind of annoying. The disposal facility opens a big hole and turns on conveyor belts. The forest has nature element rocks that roll at you. The pinball machine, well, I don't like that name, but it's the one on GameFAQs. Anyway, the pinball machine spins and has explosive blocks. Sky Arena has lightning bolts. Volcano occasionally has volcanic eruptions, and its pits are fire element. My favorite stage to play on is Forest, though Volcano is a close second. They feel like their hazards are the least intrusive while still having decent platform gameplay. I'd like to briefly mention the competitive scene of this game, which I have referenced a couple of times. This may be rather surprising, but there is a group of people playing this game competitively, even in the year 2021. They use netplay mods and emulators to let them play the game on the internet. It's some interesting stuff to watch, though to be honest, this is not a game that I'd personally play competitively. However, if you, the viewer, do have some interest in joining in, I'll leave links in the description to what seems to be the main Twitter account for this community, which has a Discord link in its description, as well as a YouTube link to a tournament that happened about a year ago. I've not joined the Discord server or anything myself, but most small fighting game communities are usually ecstatic about new members, so if you have any interest at all on the competitive side, I'd highly recommend looking into it. Obviously use common sense and follow laws and whatever else, since it will involve downloading emulators and obtaining an ISO of the game somehow, if you want to be involved. So, what's my final verdict on Rumble Arena? It's alright.
Though to be completely honest, most fighting games that were available around the same time were probably better games. Both versions of Smash Bros., Tekken 3, Street Fighter 3, and Guilty Gear X are all fighting games that were all available at the time that I'd say are better than this game, and there's probably several others that other people could come up with. But that's being a little negative, so let's talk about what you get in Rumble Arena that you can't get in any of those. First off is Digimon. You'd better believe that as a Digimon fan, I would push my way through the worst of games just to see an Agumon. And this is definitely not the worst of games. And this being one of the few multiplayer Digimon games gives it a bit more of a draw for Digimon fans. Second is the Digivolution mechanic. While other games have featured transformation-based supers, I can't think of any game where most of the characters have one, and where it can completely alter your special moves and attacks when you do it. This game also features a spectacularly different flavor of platform fighting in comparison to Super Smash Bros. Fights seem to be way more focused on projectiles and spacing than Smash Bros. Tends to be, which makes for a different sort of game. My main complaint with this game is one that others could view as a positive. I view the limited number of normal and special attacks as far too basic, as well as some other portions of the gameplay as being pretty basic. This game eventually received one sequel, Digimon Rumble Arena 2, or Digimon Battle Chronicle in Japan. There was also Digimon All-Star Rumble, a bizarre 3D fighting game that was only released in the West, as well as an upcoming MMORPG, Digimon Super Rumble, which seems to have nothing to do with the Rumble Arena series aside from the name. I've not played any of these games, but I feel it is necessary to acknowledge their existence. I'd also like to acknowledge the Battle Spirit series on the Game Boy Advance and WonderSwan. I've not played these either, but they are also platform fighters, albeit with a very different gameplay. Rumble Arena sort of feels like a predecessor to those ubiquitous anime arena fighters. You know the type, the Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storms and the My Hero 1's Justices. Interestingly, most of those games are also published by Bandai Namco. Honestly, I would love a new Digimon fighting game, though I would much prefer to take the form of a more standard 2D fighter. While I could talk about the mechanics of the hypothetical Digimon fighting game I've created in my head and why I think it would be so good, I'll spare you that level of cringe. Mostly I just prefer standard fighting games to platform or arena fighters. And Bandai Namco has shown a willingness to get decent 2D fighting games made out of their anime and multimedia franchises, with Dragon Ball FighterZ, so it is possibly a thing they could do in the future. However unlikely.
Thanks for watching. If you like this video, feel free to subscribe. I've decided on a release schedule of one video per month. I also have a Twitter account and a Twitch account that you can follow. Links in the description. See you next time.